Declan Rice is hot news at the moment, really, isn't he? He's very newsworthy. I know he is always, but the last couple of days, obviously even more so, as if the general transfer speculation around Declan Rice wasn't enough. Throw in the story that the West Ham owners are prepared to offer him £200,000 a week on an 8-year deal, then it really does become big news. If you remember when I did my video with Gio, I made a little joke because it was news to me. Gio sort of set me up. He said, come and do a video. Don't look at your phone. I won't tell you what it's about. Then he hit me with it. So my reaction live on camera when we did the video was my genuine reaction. But what you don't get is a load of time to process it. Now, when he was in the middle of telling me about this 8-year deal, I made a joke. Not a funny one, but I generally don't, do I? But it was in jest, tongue-in-cheek. I said, I bet they offer the option. The option being that when West Ham ask a player to sign a 4-year deal, there's generally a 2-year option on it, which the club can activate, thus turning that deal from a 4-year deal into a 6-year deal. Now, I only made a joke because who would put an option on an 8-year deal? So I made a joke. It turned out to be true. Apparently they have put an option in there to turn the 8 years into 10 years. Anyway. As I understand it, the 200 grand a week rises in line with inflation. Now, I'm not entirely sure they've thought this through, really, because look, far be it from me to tell you about such things. If you're interested in global finances, I'm sure you'll read the Financial Times. But I do think inflation is probably going to rise quite a lot. So Declan Rice may well find that 200 grand a week becomes quite a lot more sooner than he probably thinks. That being said, if inflation goes through the roof, it might cost 200 grand to buy a loaf of bread. You never know. Anyway, when I was listening to all of this stuff, I started to do my research, started to read what people were writing and listen to what people were saying on the radio about this thing. There seemed to be a little link, and people started referring to Declan Rice and his attraction to Manchester City. And the general consensus was Man City have been ruled out. And the reason Man City have been ruled out is Man City can't afford him because they've just bought Erling Haaland. So that ruled Declan Rice out of the equation. And I looked at it and I thought, I'm not so sure. Now, I think far from it deterring or diminishing the prospect of Declan Rice going to Man City, I actually think Erling Haaland signing for Man City is probably more likely to make Declan Rice go there. Because if I was Declan Rice and I was sat there and I was looking at other people's business, I think I would look at Man City and look at Erling Haaland and think, oh, fancy a bit of that. We might go in and playing on the same team as him, sort of thing. Now, it's a relatively cheap deal, as I understand it. 50, 60 million. Tottenham, I don't know what Tottenham have got to do it. Dortmund have inserted a clause which allows him to, there was one part of his contract allowed to get out clause, but it couldn't be activated last season or season before. But in this season, this transfer window only, I don't know, 60 million pounds, euros, not sure. It's cheap, bearing in mind how good he is. And let's be fair, Erling Haaland is one of the 2 best young strikers in Europe. I say young strikers, actually, because if you don't say young, you have to put Lewandowski in there, who's a phenomenon. But let's be fair, he's about 105, isn't he? So the young strikers, Erling Haaland, Kylian Mbappe, those are the 2 you want. I did read, actually, earlier in the season that my brain's gone. Is it Real Madrid who wanted both of them? Anyway, as I understand it, Paris Saint-Germain are preparing a huge deal to keep Kylian Mbappe there, which would be £100 million signing on fee, plus £1 million a week. So that's what I mean. It's actually quite cheap if you look at what Man City are going to end up paying for Haaland. But I think there's possibly not an awful lot between in terms of ability. I guess we won't know until the end of their careers and you look at their respective goal tallies to find out who was the best. But anyway, that doesn't matter. Point is, if I were Declan Rice, I'd probably be thinking I'd actually like to go and play for that team. I really would. It becomes incredibly attractive. And almost, you get City, because City tend not to sign, I would suggest, superstar players. City almost make the superstar player. Listen, they spend loads of money, but they don't go and break the record. So Kevin De Bruyne was at Chelsea. I think he went to Wolfsburg. I might have that wrong. Basically made his name. And then Chelsea basically, it didn't work out for him there. And then what happened is he made his name. Basically, Kevin De Bruyne became a global superstar and a bit of a phenomenon whilst he was at Manchester City. If you were to buy him 2 years ago, he'd probably cost you 150 million. And I think they do that. Bernardo Silva, the list goes on and on and on. And I think with the exception of this season and Jack Grealish, they probably sort of polish players up a little bit and do so very, very well. But I think now they have actually signed a global superstar who is... He'll continue to improve, Haaland, because he's a really good player and he's young, but they have bought somebody who's oven ready now. And that worries me about Declan Rice, and it also worries me because I think looking at how much they're going to spend, and if you factor in that they may well sell Raheem Sterling to Arsenal, I don't know how true that is, but I could believe it, as I think that's one of those transfers that works for both clubs. Actually, the fact that Haaland's not costing that much, maybe they will have enough to make a bid for Declan Rice. I just don't think we can rule it out. I'm not happy, I'm not comfortable to sit here and say, that's it, it's definitely not happening. Declan Rice isn't going to Manchester City. And when you look at the Raheem Sterling one, if they sell Raheem Sterling for 40, 50 million to Arsenal, which is probably roughly what it'll be, that'll pretty much offset the money that they're going to pay for Haaland. Now, maybe not wages, but let's be fair, Raheem Sterling's on big wages. Raheem Sterling's on about 300 grand a week. My point is, they've almost got a similar amount of money to Grealish left over once they've done their business. The books have been balanced, more or less. Don't blame them for doing the Raheem Sterling one, by the way. Has to be said, because if you watch that Real Madrid game, I mean, they operate in similar areas of the pitch most of the time. I'm talking about Vicinius. Is that his name? Vicinius Jr.? Vicinius, what I think that's his name. Vicious Jr. Vicious Jr. looked so much better than Raheem Sterling, and I think if I was an elite club, and City are an elite club, I'd probably look and actually that's the sort of player we need to get in on that left side of midfield, or whatever the case may be. They're not shy of attacking midfielders, City. I'm sure it's not a priority, but my point is they probably would look at Raheem Sterling and think actually he's not at that very, very top level. Erling Haaland is at that top level. And I think my worry is that Declan Rice is certainly at that top level. And when I look at it and I think, oh, hold on a second, there's... I just can't find comfort. It's definitely... Declan Rice is definitely staying for another season. And I don't think the 200 grand a week plays in or has anything to do with this. I think this is totally and utterly separate. And I do wonder if Man City come in and they offer money, and as much as there may or may not be a gentleman's agreement between West Ham and Declan Rice that he plays one more season, I do think it'd be really hard for Declan if Man City come in and they offer West Ham 120 million for Declan Rice, and as much as David Moyes wants to keep him, as much as the board might say, oh, but we got a little, gentleman's handshake, a gentleman's agreement. If Declan Rice isn't a little bit tempted, and whilst he is, he loves West Ham, I don't doubt that for a second, he does cast envious glances and wonder really what it'd be like to play next to Kevin De Bruyne, loading ammunition for Erling Haaland to fire the gun.